Good morning, everyone. My name is Tom Maravilla, and for those who don't know me, I started developing in 1998 at FedEx. And back then, we were a Java shop, and we all used Vim as an editor for everything. We didn't have no stinking IDEs. And so I've seen a lot of technologies come and go, and something that I don't know, how many of you in here used Vim before? Yeah, good, a few. So you guys know, those of you who have know that you learn shortcuts. And in fact, someone will ask you, hey, how did you do that? And you can't really tell them. You have to like show them on a keyboard. You know what I mean? Well, Visual Studio Code is really kind of well, let's start with a little history. Back in 2012, Microsoft announced this little project that was happening, Project Monaco. They hired this guy, Eric Gamma. Does anyone know who that is? What his claim to fame is? Well, Microsoft hired him, and he actually worked on Eclipse and helped bring that forth. We used at FedEx, once we got out of the manually compile and all that through command line and Vim, we started using Eclipse. But he helped put together Visual Studio Code. Project Monaco turned into Visual Studio Code. And I like this quote here. It says that Visual Studio Code combines the simplicity of a code editor with what developers need for their code edit debug cycle. So I got most of these, or a lot of these slides and tips and tricks from a session of Build that I went to this year. And this was one of the slides that they had put together showing that if you think of a regular editor like VI, or you think of a full-fledged IDE like Visual Studio Code can be in between. It can be wherever you want it to be. So if you need something really basic just to edit some HTML files or something like that, you can use Visual Studio Code. If you need something heavier on the IDE side, you can use Visual Studio Code by using plugins. And at first when I started using code, I was like, really? Because I use Visual Studio the whole time. And I'm like, why would I ever need Visual Studio Code? But I've started using it more and more. I don't think it will replace Visual Studio for me. I think if I'm working on heavier enterprise repositories and architectures, that I'll stick with Visual Studio. But if I'm doing full stack development, then I really enjoy Visual Studio Code more on the front end development. So my purpose today is just to go through a lot of the shortcuts in Visual Studio and customizations that you can do. Now, Visual Studio Code is free. You can download it and get going right now. And how many of you used Visual Studio Code just by show of hands? So good, there's a good amount. It's a really slick editor.
Starts up faster.
Yes.
So will these tips and tricks be applicable to both Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code, or are they?
Some of them will, but a lot of them have to do with Visual Studio itself, or Visual Studio Code.
Targeted primarily at Visual Studio
Code, yeah. I'm sure there's a way to, Visual Studio Code, that's where we're targeting.
Okay.
Yeah. Did I answer your question?
Try it in Visual Studio, see what happens.
Okay, so this is primarily Visual Studio Code.
Code, right. A lot of times I'll say Visual Studio, and right now I'm meaning Visual Studio Code. I should probably just say code. Code.
Yes.
Okay.
Remember, this whole session was delivered on Visual Studio Code for the Mac.
Yes. Yeah. So a lot of times in the session they'll say command, and it's control on our side, on the Windows side. So let's get started. So this is a Visual Studio project. Now, the one thing, if you're going to take away anything from this session, is the shortcut Control-Shift-P. Okay? You should write that down. You should memorize it, Control-Shift-P. If I hit Control-Shift-P, that brings up a little window here, and you can type almost anything you want in there, and it will help you with what you're trying to do. So we're going to be going over some of the configurations that you can do initially when you download code.
P is in Paul.
P is in Paul. Yep. Control-Shift-P. That's going to save your bacon.
So it's a way to turn your Visual Studio into a command line.
You didn't raise your hand.
Oh, sorry.
Yes. So yes, you type in your commands here, and I'm just going to type in, there's some user settings out there. I don't really remember where it was, but I'm just going to type user and look in here, and then first thing that pops up is the user settings. Okay. Now, this is kind of split into two screens. On the left-hand side here is all the settings, and there's a ton of them. Okay, they're all kind of collapsed. And we can type up here in search settings for, let's say, like font or format, for if I want to format my code. And we'll notice all the settings are right here that you can change. Now you can't change them on this side, on the left side. I can't like change it here. So what I can do over on the right hand side here is where I make my changes. Okay? For example, if I want font size, let me remove this from here. So by default, the font size is 14. So if I'm like, I don't know, font something, I don't know, I'll just type in font. So I look through here, now I see right here font size. These are all highlighted in here. Now I can change this one of two ways. I can either click on this pencil and say copy to settings. You see that's over here. And I can change that to whatever I want. So let's say 20. Okay? So I'll go back to 16.
What are you doing to make it take effect?
That's a good question. So when I've kind of been playing around with this.
Where's the save button?
I'm getting there. So you notice autosave? Okay, I love this setting, it's autosave. If I set this and say after delay, now let's go over here and type autosave, because I know after this presentation you're going to download this and you're going to open it up and go, what did he type? Save something? So I'm just going to type save. And again, Control-Shift-P, user. So you got to type Control-Shift-P, user, and you'll get this. So I look down through here and I say format on save. That's a cool feature, right? Save it and my code automatically gets formatted. Autosave is turned off by default. We notice after here, or over on the right hand side, I set to after delay. And then I set the delay to 1,000, or basically a second. You can turn that to just, there's a bunch of different settings for that, and I can see what those are by hitting Control Space. Let's see. What is it?
Do you want to be on the autosave, not the delay?
Right. So I can see on focus, on window change. So I tried on focus, which means if I change focus or if I change window or it will save. But I think my favorite is after delay, and then I set the delay. Now watch this. This is really cool. Oh, initially, since I changed that, I have to save it manually. And now it will automatically save after that delay. Oops.
I like that.
There we go. Okay, so
How did you manually save it?
Control S. Yeah. And if I want to mess with my font families, I can download any font I want from Microsoft or GitHub or anything like that. And I can type that in here and it will automatically change the font families, which is cool. Oh, themes. Let's talk about themes really quick, because I like dark themes. So if I want to change themes, I know Control-Shift-P and just type theme. And if you notice here, there's some themes that you can have that you have by, just typing in your themes. If you want additional themes, you can go out to the store and you can look through all these different themes and install. You can go crazy with themes.
Which one is this?
This is, they talked, what is it, the Code 2?
Cobalt 2 is
Co-
right?
Right, Cobalt 2, right here. And again, if we want to change our theme, oops, Control-Shift-P, theme. Maybe that's not a good one to change to. Dang it. Oh, color theme, there we go. Let's go light. Whoa. Yeah, that's bright.
Warn us before you do that.
Yeah. Let's go back to Cobalt 2. There we go, I like that one. That one's supposedly tested and be best. It's the most easy on the eyes.
5 minutes.
What? So auto saving, there's just, if you need to change any custom themes in auto or in your settings, you go to that user settings and it's really easy to change and save. Something else I'll show you really quick is the playground. So if I type playground, this is an interactive playground that you can learn all kinds of different features inside of code. And they actually let you do it in these blocks here. So if I follow these directions and if I select a few lines of code here and then Control-Shift-Alt-Down arrow, you'll notice I can change in the playground. You can actually learn more about Visual Studio Code in this playground. So I encourage you to go and just type the word playground in, Control-Shift-P, playground, and play. Let's go over, if we have multiple windows open for files. So if we open a file, we do Control 1 and 2 and 3, 4, we can have multiple windows open up. If you want to close those, it's Control W to get to bring that back. Control PP lets you bring back all the files you've been working with. So you can do like Control 2, and then you don't like that, you can close it, Control W, and then Control PP, you can go back to the file that you had just closed. So I'm a huge shortcut guy. I know some people don't like shortcuts. If you ever want to know Tony's kryptonite, just ask him to try and do some shortcuts. So Control tilde brings up a command prompt, which is really cool because in Visual Studio Code, if you're creating new projects, like if you're creating .NET projects, .NET new, and you see which templates we have installed. So if you're needing a command line, you can actually bring up multiple, you can have multiple command lines. If you notice over here, I just clicked on this plus, and I can have 2 command lines. I can actually bring them together and have 2 command lines down here to do tasks. Again, that's Control tilde. That brings that back and forth. Control-Shift-P, we're going to type in keyword Zen. Zen. I like this one because it just takes away all the outer darkness. Okay, we're going to say Zen again, and that brings it all back. All right. Oh, I'll show you one more really quick. So we're gonna trash can that, get rid of that. Now, if I want to open up another session of code, I can type code. I can cd into my directory. Okay, so I'm gonna go into cd core. And then I'm just going to type code, and if I put a dot here, I'm going to open a new session of Visual Studio Code with that project in focus. Okay. Now, if I want to change completely, I can say code-r, and that will change Visual Studio itself, the code I'm working into the new project. So I'm now in this new project. One more thing is if I go out here to Visual Studio Code, you'll notice that you have the stable build, the download here, and you also have the Insider edition, okay? And that's released every day, and it's pretty stable. And what's cool is you can actually have the Insider edition up and running, as well as Visual Studio, the stable build up and running, and you can be seeing what the new releases are. And you notice here I have a different theme for the Insider, so I know as I'm working between the two that this is the Insider build and this is the stable build.
So this one's cobalt, is that what copper?
I don't know. It's just red. Red means, of course, bad. So. Any questions? That's all I got. There's so much more to Visual Studio Code, but like I was saying, Control-Shift-P or Command-Shift-P for the Mac users, and it loads so much faster than Visual Studio, and updates are like lightning fast, where Visual Studio takes a long time. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Well,
Also, the roll's going around, everybody get a chance to sign that, we'll usually do that for the drawing. and then-
PowerPoint presentations are boring, so let's play a game.
I like
42.
13?
42, let's see.
Like Jim did.
That's too high.
It's too high.
21.
21. Oh, someone knows the trick to this. 11.
16. 13. That's where your 13 went, Jim.
Yeah, I knew it.
Mason.
Now-
Jim's 13.
That's not anything particularly impressive. I mean, this was a couple dozen lines of code. Took me about 10 minutes to set up, including testing and debugging. I bet anyone in this room could have done the same. But here's the truly awesome part of it. I did not use a single line of JavaScript anywhere when writing this. Pull this over. This is Blazor. The entire thing was written in C# with Razor template syntax. Has anyone here worked with Razor with ASP.NET pages? All right, so this should look pretty familiar. But this isn't an ASP.NET application. This was running in the browser. Check this out. And of course I've got to reload, but if we look at this, this is loading DLLs. And there's no plugins. This isn't Silverlight or Flash. This isn't a Java applet. This is actually running these DLLs in the browser itself Now, how's that possible? Who here has worked with any sort of ASM.NET, or sorry, ASM.js, Inscription, any of that sound familiar? Okay, time for a bit of a history lesson then. Over the last 10 years or so, there's been a growing acknowledgement that JavaScript is just no good for performance or for managing complexity, which makes it a bad match as the need for applications and web applications in particular grows. Now, they started working on this. The first really big acknowledgement of this was when Google Chrome came out. Remember how Google made a big deal of how much they had optimized their JavaScript engine? That was about 10 years ago, and then Mozilla started doing the same, and they made a bunch of improvements, but it can really only get you so far because of the design of the language itself keeps getting in the way. And so after a while, they started looking at alternatives. First major thing that came out was called ASM.js, which was a hyper-optimized subset of JavaScript that could run at a much higher performance by basically sandboxing it into a special VM. They managed to do some pretty cool things with it. For example, here's the Unreal Engine running inside the browser. As you can see, we are in a browser tab. And there's a lot of this, but it's a different project. So yeah, that's Unreal Engine 3 running inside Firefox on ASM.js, which is pretty cool. But let's face it, Unreal Engine 3 was cutting edge 14 years ago. That kind of shows the limits of ASM.js. It can get you a lot, but that's about the peak of what it can do. So they started working on something else called WebAssembly. Anyone heard of WebAssembly? Okay, we've got a few hands here. That's sort of the next iteration of ASM.js. It's not a subset of JavaScript. It's its own new thing that uses a bytecode format that runs in a highly optimized VM inside the browser. It works on all browsers, well, all modern browsers, with one notable exception. It theoretically works on Safari, but there are some serious implementation issues which Apple promises they will fix real soon now, and has been promising for quite a while now, so we'll see. But for everyone else, WebAssembly works. And that's where we come to Blazor. Think about this. If stuff like ASM.js and WebAssembly can run things as complicated as the Unreal Engine inside the browser, then logically they can also run a smaller, simpler engine, such as the Common Language Runtime. And that's where Blazor comes in. It runs an instance of Mono, which is, I'm sure you all know Mono, open source CLR, that has been compiled to run on the WebAssembly platform. The Blazor technology is basically three things. It's the Mono CLR running in WebAssembly, plus the Blazor framework that lets it interoperate with the DOM and with JavaScript, and the Blazor libraries that tie it all together. So you can do things like this with the C# Razor syntax. Up at the top, we've got this page directive, which says this is where you route to. And here we've got our markup. And down at the bottom, we've got our functions block, which is where you put the raw C# stuff. And then things with an @ on them are interpolations. That's where you can pull in things down here. So far, so good? Now I've got some other things on here because there's more to Blazor. Here we've got a page called Reader, which I'll show you in a moment, and we're injecting an HTTP client. The inject directive is how Blazor does dependency injection. You can set up, it sets you up with two things automatically. One is you can get an HTTP client, and the other is you can get a navigator for doing routing inside of your program. Like click on this button and route to this page within the application. Because Blazor works as a single page application architecture. If you work with Angular, for example, same basic idea, just without all the JavaScript. And so you can do something like this. Okay, got to run this again. Now I need something that will give me open access, that will enable cores, otherwise the browser is going to jump on it and say you can't do that, but let's see. So if I load this, it made a web request from inside the browser. Simple enough, but that's how you do dependency injection. You can also build components. Here I've got a very simple component that has a parameter annotation on this property. And what that means is that you can use this as an HTTP attribute when you use it in a page. So show count, and here's our value. And here I've also got a parameter inside the router in the page, which again you use the parameter attribute for. And so what you do with that is something like this. This is all very simple so far, but this is showing you the basic building blocks. And with this, people who are familiar with C# and with HTML in the DOM can build some much more complicated things, which unfortunately I can't show you at this moment because our site's firewall blocks the download of DLL files. This is something that the Blazor team is aware of, and they're working on in a later revision. They're going to see if they can't rename the DLL files to some other extension to slip past firewalls. But for the moment, as has been pointed out, this is a technology that's still under development. Now this is still C#. All the stuff you'd expect to work still works. We've got our dependencies here. We can pull in stuff from NuGet. We can, for example, here's an interesting one. This is running the HTML canvas. driven by C#. And it's not even all, doesn't necessarily all have to be C#. Remember that the CLR stands for Common Language Runtime, not C# Language Runtime. So let's try something. Just to show you that I have nothing at all up my sleeves here, I'm going to write this right in front of you. This is a different CLR language known as Boo, which you've probably never used, which is a shame because it's kind of awesome. But it looks, it feels a lot like Python, only different. So let's see. Let's make this appropriate. Let's put this on the same line. Now, we can all agree this is not C#. Yes? So drop this on the Boo compiler. We've got a DL right here. Let's go back over here. I'll just do it here. Now, I'm building this right in front of you, so hoping this works. Let's add a page. No. Okay, let's see if this works. But anyone can do that. Let's get a little bit more meta. How about, here's something truly cool that one of my colleagues in the Blazor early adopter community did. Here we go. If you can run the CLR, you can run anything that runs on the CLR.
Oh, that's awesome.
It takes a second, but
Nice.
that's the Roslyn compiler running inside the browser. This is Blazor.
You could run and compile that program and ran in the browser.
Yes. Building and executing C# code on the fly locally inside the browser in WebAssembly. Yes, it really is. Now, this is still new emerging technology. There's new release about every month or so far. They still have breaking changes each time, though they recently have tended to be pretty minor ones. This is getting more stable as it goes, but it's still not stable. Microsoft hasn't officially decided to support it quite yet. They did talk about it at Build, which is how we ended up getting here. And they've made it open source, so if they don't, a bunch of people from the community have said they will keep on supporting this because, face it, this is pretty cool, isn't it? And the other thing is, as I've mentioned, this is running with DLLs, which firewalls like to block out. They're working on that. But these are short-term issues that will be fixed over time. Personally, I think this is good technology with a bright future ahead of it.
Just one thing I saw Build at a different conference session about Xamarin.
Mm-hmm.
There's a group of Xamarin community developers that are actually making a Xamarin compile out to WebAssembly. So you could do your iOS, Android, Windows, and web all in one project using Xamarin and Xamarin Forms. I thought that was pretty wild. So another example of cool stuff that can happen.
Yeah, Xamarin's doing something similar. It's not quite the same, but it's pretty similar, and it looks interesting too. Anyone have any other questions about how Blazor works? All right.